Collectivity with Hasha DA, the moderator, and we're just going to begin. We have till 12:50.
Alors c'est ça, les dernières panélistes nous ont ouvert l'appétit en parlant de nourriture, mais on continue la discussion autour de la notion de la collectivité. Alors d'abord, mes chers amis de l'Italie et de l'Allemagne vont commencer par faire leur présentation.
So good morning, everybody. We are very happy to be here in Montreal, so at this conference. So thank you again for the kind invitation. Rehearsing Collectivity, Choreography Behind Dance was an interdisciplinary project which took place in 2011 over 10 days in Berlin at the Tanzfabrik UFA Studios. And it was curated by the three of us, two visual art curators, two dance curators, Elisa and I, and Emanuele, a visual art curator. The format of the project included an exhibition, performances, some lectures, and a publication, which actually you can find on the table in the other room. And a workshop as well. We understand this lecture as a continuation of the project itself. Our goal is to reassemble and restage our past project in front of and with the participation of a new audience, regathering a set of keywords which were of importance for the project.
Choreography, score 1. Announcement, 2002, Roman Ondak.
Your attention please for the following announcement. As a sign of solidarity with recent world events, for the next minute do not interrupt the activity you are doing at this moment.
Collectivity 1. Collectivity is something that takes place as we arbitrarily gather to take part in different forms of cultural activities, such as looking at art. If we countenance that beyond all the roles that are allotted to us in culture, roles such as those of being viewers, listeners, and audience members in one capacity or another, there are other emergent possibilities for the exchange of shared perspectives or insights or subjectivities. We allow for some form of emergent collectivity. To speak of collectivities is to denativize community, to argue it away from the numerous essential roots of place and race and kinship structures that have for so long been the glue that has held it together. Irit Rogov, We, Collectivities, Mutualities, Participations, 2004.
Circumstance, Kitchen Choreography 2005, Lydia Castro and Olafur Olafsson.
Movement 1. Political lexicon is surprisingly indebted to the terminology of physical movement. Words such as revolution, uprising, strike, all originate from descriptions of physical displacements, used to describe a social body in the act of pursuing a collective goal or in the position of having obtained it. Even a general term such as movement shows this ambiguity. Paradoxically, if the term is used literally, it refers to an abstraction, as physical movement is not something physical that exists in space, but a perceptual construction in time. On the other hand, if it is employed figuratively, it denotes something concrete, a specified set of people struggling to reach their goals. Vincenzo Latronico, abjection can also be referred to as an equivalence, 2012.
Choreography, score 2. A disturbance that travels through space and time is a project by visual artist Aldo Giannotti, specifically created for rehearsing collectivity, a postcard inviting the audience to perform a human wave in the venue of the exhibition. Giannotti produced a tribune that served both as a sitting area for the audience and as a stage for his score to be performed. We can call it ola, the Spanish word for wave, as in the action performed by the spectators at a football game, the automatic behavior of the crowd. We can call it a swarm, a plurality of living beings whose behavior follows, or seems to follow, rules embedded in the neural system. Biologists call a swarm a multitude of animals of similar size and body orientation, moving together in the same direction, performing action in a coordinated way. In a condition of social hypercomplexity, human beings tend to act as a swarm. When the infosphere is too dense and too fast for a conscious processing of the information, people tend to conform to shared behavior. Franco Berardi Bifo, Automation and Infinity of Language, Poetry versus Financial Semi-Capital, 2012.
Collectivity 2. On March 22nd, 2003, in the Saletta Comunale for Contemporary Art in Castel San Pietro, Bologna, started at 6 p.m., the artist Cesare Pietroiusti repeatedly and continuously sang the first few words of two Italian fastest songs, Giovinezza, Youth, Youth, Spring of Beauty, and Vincere, to win, to win, to win, and we will win in the sky, on land, and on sea. It's our word of honor, our supreme will. The artist's intention was to stop only when he had completely lost his voice. In the book Language and Death, Giorgio Agamben says the voice is the link between meaning and the body, meaning and the flesh. Voice is the bodily expression of meaning and also the bodily manifestation of the self. Ritournelle is a sound, a sign, a voice, a song that makes it possible to link our existence with the existence of other human beings. And it is also the song of solidarity, that it is making rebellion and autonomy from the unified rhythm of capitalist productivity possible. Franco Berardi Bifo, Automation and Infinity of Language, Poetry versus Financial Semi-Capital. The action ended at 11:45 p.m. before Pietro Justi reached his goal of losing his voice. The artist stopped the action after a group of fascist youngsters unexpectedly joined him in singing.
Movement 2. Sometimes people start to sing the same song and to dance the same dance. It can be dangerous. Fascism is based on this kind of homogeneous subjectivation and modern totalitarianism in general. But it can also happen in ironic and nomadic ways. People start to create a new song and they do it together. That's a movement. What is a movement? It is an event opening up a new landscape. When a movement happens in the field of art, in the field of social politics, this is the effect. Thanks to the movement, literally a displacement, you are able to see things that you did not see before. A new rhythm makes it possible to see a new landscape. And when you see the landscape, you discover new ways. Franco Berardi Bifo, Automation and Infinity of Language, Poetry versus Financial Semi-Capital.
Social choreography. I would define the concept of social choreography as something that creates a connection between the social and the aesthetic, by attributing to the aesthetic a fundamental role in the description of the political and the social. Choreography is here understood as a performative structuring of body practices, as an analytical category that allows reflection on social order, as well as a concept that permits exposures of the relationship between the aesthetic and the political in all social fields. Gabriele Klein, 2012.
Choreography, score 3. Olivia Plender, Audience Survey 2011, Part 1. The following is a selection of questions from the performance Audience Survey by Olivia Plender, which took place April 29, 2011 at UFA Studios in Berlin during rehearsing Collectivity. In this part of the performance, the audience was asked to sit on a tribune and answer the survey's questions by hand raising. We now kindly ask for your participation. If you want to answer yes, please raise your hand. If your answer is no, don't do anything.
Have you ever found it hard to get along with other people? Have you ever lived alone? Do you live alone now? Would you agree that work is the most fulfilling part of your life? Have you ever taken a train without paying? Have you ever taken an illegal substance? Have you ever vandalized public property? Have you ever lied to the police? Have you ever cheated on your income tax? Have you ever played the stock market?
Do you see your friends as often as you like to? Do you generally consider yourself to be a happy person? Do you think that it is difficult to admit in public that you have been or are unhappy? Do you think that unhappy people get ostracized socially? Have you ever been in China, to China? Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Have you ever read Das Kapital? Have you ever read a magazine?
Have you ever had more than $10,000 in your bank account? Do you understand how the global economy works? Have you ever had a dream about your computer or which involved your computer? Would you trust Google more than the government? Have you ever participated in a public protest? Would you agree that it made a difference? Would you agree that things will be better in the future?
Olivia Plender, Audience Survey 2011, Part 2.
This is an abstract of the second part of the performance audience survey by Olivia Plender. The audience in this case was invited to dialogue with the artist and change position in the exhibition space according to their answers. So different constellations were appearing. We are now going to read the transcription of a dialogue extract.
Have you ever felt that participation in a collective has allowed you to fulfill your individual potential?
Let's imagine a group in which every person feels like they are fulfilling their individuality. I think that only works in a group where everyone needs this person as an individual and vice versa. Let's imagine a perfect village where everyone is doing exactly the job that they feel fulfilled by. For example, I'm baking and everyone needs my baking. It only works when there is a delivery and a need for what I deliver.
Maybe you are baking for 5 years and suddenly do not feel fulfilled anymore. The group members have to be open enough and accepting enough to say, okay, you should not bake anymore.
And what if I'm totally fulfilled by baking, but I'm a very lousy baker? Other people find my cakes unpleasant, but I'm having a good time.
Within your idea of the village structure where everyone has a role and a productive function, what about the non-productive people? Is there room within that for taking care of a disabled person, for example?
I personally would feel unhappy in a group that does not need what I have to deliver, or if I am asked to deliver something that I'm not good at.
Swarm effect. The swarm is a form of collective action that arises out of networks in which the connections between participants are loose enough for the impression of a whole. For something like a swarm collective to emerge, it is sufficient that every individual communicates with a couple of his or her neighbors, as long as some of those neighbors in turn communicate with other neighbors, and so on. This means that we may engage in casual exchange with a limited number of others who we position as our neighbors, though in the case of internet-based communication, they can be scattered across the globe. And from these communications can evolve, as an effect, a collective undertaking whose form as an agent will have been that of a swarm. The people who participate in this collective undertaking will have no representation of the collective as a whole. In fact, they may learn that such a collective exists only from reports in the mass media, which will only react and report when the dispersed activity have acquired a certain visibility in the public arena, in the form of gathering, for instance. It is for this reason that I emphasize that the social swarm is an effect. It has an effective reality, not an ontological or representational one. Kai van Eyckels, From Arcane to Pertain, Suggestion for an Uncreative Collectivity, 2012.
Collectivity 3, Conclusions. Throughout the broad scope of the project, the definition of circumstance was increasingly stretched beyond those spatial and temporal coordinates that could have helped produce the condition in which a clear definition of collectivity could emerge. Imagination, flexibility, risk and danger, as well as performative potential, are aspects concerning collectivity which were repeatedly stressed by the artists as well as by the lecturers. This could indicate a possible direction for the rethinking of collectiveness as dynamic, constantly changing, and self-redefining entities. According to the latest news from around the world, we could even describe collectivity as a disturbance that traveled through space and time, a definition that would fit for choreography too, and hence confirm anew the relation between the two fields with all the implications concerned. A conflictual, dynamic, ever-becoming idea of collectivity seems to be the point made by rehearsing collectivity choreography beyond dance, where rehearsal is still central and almost the only possible mode of acting collectively. It is therefore vital to keep the imaginative effort alive. An active dimension of desire, where imagination is not seen as an opposite to reason or reality, but rather as a nomadic tool used to travel back and forth on a line of tension between the self and the common, the present and the past, art and society. Thank you.
Ils vont juste déménager de l'autre côté. Toujours plus long avec les collectifs.
Okay. All right. Are we all in? Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're really glad to share our process and a bit about our project with you this morning. So we are Salta, and we are a collective of 7 dancers based in Oakland, California. Responding to the precariousness of being artists, we formed the collective in 2012 with a goal of starting our own space for rehearsal and performance. Since that time, our vision has expanded to include projects that make space for dance to happen more broadly. This morning in our talk, we will provide a bit of context for our work, as well as some questions that have come up for us, and we invite you to share your questions and how the project resonates with you as well. For the past 2 years, we have curated a monthly performance series that takes place in a different venue each month, collaborating with a variety of organizations and individuals. Admission is always a non-monetary donation to the Free Bar and Boutique, where everyone eats, drinks, and shops for free. This alternative economy and context frees us to be radically inclusive, experimental, and eccentric in our curation. We invite a mix of established and emerging choreographers, bridging generations of Bay Area dance makers. In addition to our monthly series, Salta is engaged in collaboration with other dance makers and curators locally and nationally. We have co-curated an event with Brooklyn-based collective Aunts, and we have begun to build a network of venues and curators in support of experimental performers organizing their own tours. And as an aside, if you yourself are a venue or an artist or a collective that would be interested in participating in this network, we'd love to talk with you after. After 2 years of organizing and curating together, Salta is currently in the process of obtaining a huge building in Oakland with a group of like-minded collectives, including a free school, a printing press, a radical bookstore, and more. If successful, the project will provide Salta with a platform and a permanent home to host workshops and performances and provide affordable rehearsal space to Bay Area dancers. Coming together with this collective of collectives is a natural movement forward for us as we invest our time and resources in expanding our collaborative process, nourishing ourselves as artists, and making space for dance to happen in Oakland.
Don't go too fast because of the translation.
Slower.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Salta events are curated to offer a different way of interfacing with performance. The structure of our events are loose and the aesthetic is very DIY. Our primary focus is on curator as taking care of the artist that we invite to work with us and leaving room for audience to participate with the work in different ways. As working artists in the field, we want to offer a platform that we ourselves would want to participate in. One way that we decided to start researching how to be curators was by adopting the, in quotes, yes policy to anyone who approached us interested in performing, volunteering, hosting, or anything, really. Every month after a show, we ask, what did we learn? As we get answers to our questions of which environments promote deep research, engage a diverse community, and wild experimentation, we immediately implement our discoveries. We find it satisfying to be in the same risk situation as the artists. For us, risk means consent to not being in total control of content. It means not putting constraints on the artist's work. It means a constant learning from actually doing. It means a constant research into new forms and proposals which directly mirrors our personal artistic practices as well. Over the past 2 years, we have employed various curatorial methods for our events. Some shows are closer to a party, and while others are more formal presentations of work, we have experimented with chain curation, in which one artist is invited, then they invite another person, then they invite another person, etc. We have organized events around spatial constraints, such as dances performed only in the round, and thematic constraints, such as only task-based work. We've used guest curators to bring in artists we don't know because we don't want to become so insular. Our two favorite formats we call 333 and Salta Throws Down. 333 is 3 performers or groups that receive full support and attention from all 7 of us. And a Salta Throws Down event is 20 plus performers showing work in a large warehouse or ballroom with simultaneous and overlapping performances, and hopefully they also receive all 7 of us as support, but a little less intimate. Although we are currently interested in these 2 curatorial models of 333 and Salta Throws Down, we do not want to become locked in these forms. We curate in these alternative modes in order to allow people to try things that they wouldn't try in a more formal or traditional showing or proscenium stage setting. We will continue with our yes policy of expansion, of going for broke, for never getting entirely comfortable with what we host. Salta wishes to remember that movement can merge, form relationship, engage, but it can also be radically alien and challenging. We ask ourselves as curators and all involved in Salta events to forget constantly justifying their or our dances and just dance.
Salta approaches curation, making work, organizing events, and all of the administrative, social, and technical projects that come with it as multiplicitously as possible. The 7 of us are invested in collaboration in a deep and essential way, but we allow for a fluid definition of what that means. We have no codified rubric for how to collectively run meetings, reach agreements, how to curate and run a show. We operate a constantly shifting terrain, modifying and honing based on what works for us and others and what doesn't, what might each new space call for, and what conversations we can have with the people who actually run this space, how we can be in service of the art and in service of our own desires and the desires of those there to perform and there to watch. Salta's process has been described as a swirl, and colleagues have remarked that the fact that we have no system points to how well it's working. We hope that they're right. Douglas Dunn's description of the Grand Union's process gets at an essential aspect of our own. Quote, "Whoever speaks, speaks. Whoever dances, dances." Salta comes together, identifies what we're excited about, what needs to be done, and then we go do it. Working together is for us an attuning of this relational swirl to keep our hearts and our minds deeply invested in the process, the outcome, and the surprises that always seem to come with it. We find this to be a social, joyful model that also aligns with our politics, a commitment to commoning, pooling resources, creating space outside of institutions, and searching for alternate modes of working within and outside of hierarchy, patriarchy, and capitalism. Through collaboration, we want to investigate the political possibilities of experimental artist-run spaces and practices, is what I meant to say. We connect with Goat Island's description of their working process as, quote, "a decentering expansion where divisions between individuals and ideas of authorship are blurred." While we're aware of some of the strengths of a more informal collective process, we're also sensitive to the ways that power can operate invisibly within any group. So this really informs our desire to remain self-reflexive and continue to evolve our working methods.
We have been saying from the start of our project that our series is, quote, "a historical process," end quote. Salta can be seen not only as a beautiful swirl, but also as many threads in a historical web. One thread is those that came before us, who fuel our ideas, who support us as mentors and artists. One way we have acknowledged these generational ties is by curating older, more established artists into our performance events, inviting them to share about the works that they have been creating in the Bay Area for longer than we've been alive. Another thread is our consideration for the years to come, the future. We take into account our anticipated growth and outreach. We are invested in the future of the dance world. Another thread is how we situate ourselves within the current political and artistic climate of the East Bay Area, and also the contemporary dance world at large. At the heart of this historical process is a reworking and redefining of what it means to be a dancer. With the traditional company model increasingly more difficult to maintain and sustain, we are holding a unique kind of space for the freelance dancer. As artist curators, dancer curators ourselves, part of our project as Salta is figuring out what it means to dance and to be a dancer at this historical juncture in which dance artists are facing a scarcity of gigs, funds, and community support. In our area, the Bay Area, this juncture is compounded by a tech boom that is rapidly shifting the economics of our environment. San Francisco has become too costly to live in. The service class, working class, artists, queers are moving in droves to Oakland. We are daily faced with the reality of gentrification and the responsibility to integrate ourselves into an area largely composed of communities of color.
So initially we gathered around the dream of opening a space that would be affordable to rent, serious about offering free performances, and passionate about facilitating experiment and exploration. Does that work? Thanks. Facilitating experiment and exploration by new and established artists alike. However, as we began to bike around Oakland, scribbling down numbers posted on the sides of buildings, we felt uneasy joining the growing numbers beginning to invest in Oakland's supposedly empty space, propelling the project of gentrification forward. Realizing the complications of our space procuring project, we decided to instead begin hosting a performance series in multiple places. This topic of space and place has come to define much of what the Salta Collective does and is about. So since our first event of performance in June of 2012, we've hosted, facilitated, curated 18 more performances, all held in spaces donated to us. This has allowed us to offer free dance events and has provided a financial accessibility to audience members. It has also provided us with the opportunity to envision our performances and collective as having a slightly different relationship to a capitalist framework, where we rely less on funding and corporate capital sponsorship and more on connections and relationships within our surrounding communities and the resources that they can comfortably provide. As an aside, this goes further into conversations about changing economic structures, which we could talk about later. So sometimes the line between domestic, professional, and artistic is blurred, and bartering is enabled in these interactions. Within this framework, we have not had to provide any evidence of aligning with values or missions that we don't support, and instead focus on supporting the artistic freedom and expression of artists that are both local and are not. So these donated spaces have been widely varied. We've had performances in storefront venues, in cafes, in pristine dance studios, several houses, live-work warehouses, galleries large and small, yoga parlors, spaces finished and unfinished, fixed and vanishing, old and new. Each has required a different vision of who might perform there and how, as well as a great amount of flexibility in approach on both ours as well as the performers' parts. So it's required that the audience shifts with us. There's a network of people that go to each of our shows, and we also often have very new audience members, mostly depending on the newer spaces that we are within. Salta has been consistently challenged to rethink and reapproach how we do things, and what we value and how we interact with people new and the places that we come into contact with. We would like to think that this has encouraged a desire and willingness to remain self-aware, accountable, and creative as we strive towards a feminist, anti-racist, and inclusive support of experimental dance and performance.
It's working, so I wanted to say a few words about the photos that have been going on behind us. I've been the primary documenter of the SALTA events, and I think it's interesting, like in a moment where images are constantly taken, accessible, consumable, Instagrammable, and also I feel like often used as justification or materials to show what you're doing, you know, that it has to be documented. It makes me want to resist the role of the photographer, particularly images of dance that are beautiful, virtuosic, poised. And what interests me in continuing to document the SALTA events is that as an entire collection of photographs, I think it illuminates in a nice way the different kinds of spaces we've been inhabiting. And I think it's also, Bree was talking about bartering, like a nice exchange with the artist. You know, we don't pay them, but I offer them the photographs to use however they want.
We would like to conclude with a set of questions that have come up for us about the project. In what ways do our events participate in broader dynamics surrounding gentrification and the use of arts programming in land speculation schemes? What would an active strategy against gentrification look like? As a group of white women, in what ways can we actively support and take leadership from artists and communities of color? What does decolonizing our series entail? In what ways does the rise of the artist curator or the curatorial collective, in what ways is it emblematic of the economic crisis, austerity measures, and the defunding of cultural and educational institutions that characterizes our contemporary moment? How does spectatorship change or morph based on varying presentation contexts for dance? What sort of performances are nurtured by our presenting model? What pieces are squashed? How does our role as curators or logistics people intersect with or support our artistic lives? We welcome your thoughts on these or further questions. And I made these flyers if you want to stay in touch with us. They have our email.
Avec le... Oh, vous êtes tous anglophones, puis moi je parle en français, vous avez pas vos casques. Pas du tout. Donc c'est ça, je me pose la question, est-ce que vous qualifieriez votre travail de commissariat relationnel? Qu'est-ce qui, dans le processus collaboratif, qu'est-ce que la collectivité apporte pour pouvoir développer des projets à caractère relationnel, autant dans le choix des lieux dans lesquels vous vous inscrivez, ou aussi l'interaction vraiment avec la participation du public? Est-ce que vous avez compris de quoi je parle, de quoi je me questionne?
What is our curatorial process? And sorry, we got our headphones. We're getting close. What is our say it again?
Okay, well, I can try in English. My question is more about how the collectivity is necessary, or how does it help to develop a relation with the audience and with the choice of the places you are going to perform, and how does it nourish, how the fact to be a group and to sing together to projects is helping to develop the relation with the audience, and yeah, that was my question. Very badly translated.
Thank you.
I'll begin and then the collective can add in. So I guess I would like to say that sometimes the spaces have come to us in some ways. At first, when we were beginning, there was a lot of reaching out and asking people, directly going to people, cold emailing, showing up at galleries. And since that time 2 years ago, just based on how things happen and how connections are built, then we've also had people that have offered spaces to us, and that happens a lot more now. Almost depending on that, in the past year, I would say, the spaces have then defined a lot of the choices that we do make. So if it's a tiny new gallery space, or a space that specifically likes to curate and support queer artists themselves, then that is going to definitely inform how we're thinking about that monthly performance. And then sometimes with artists, the same thing goes along. If we're thinking about a smaller venue, and sometimes it's work that we've seen, people we know, and sometimes it's, again, just cold emailing, oh, you know, there's this person, or someone told us about that person, or we'll reach out beyond just ourselves to a broader community. So space, again, has been very shaping in a lot of the choices that we've made. I'll say one thing about us all working together is, you know, sometimes when you go into a huge warehouse and you show up and the artists are gonna show up in 2 hours and they've never been there and they have an hour to figure out where they're gonna do their work and it's covered in nails and sawdust. Having 7 people to just hit it and clean it and work together makes such a difference. Again, there's a certain amount of stepping back that we have to practice all the time and stepping forward. So sometimes it's making choices, you know, like who wants to take the notes? Like no one really wants to, but someone always will step forward and that will shift, as well as sometimes being very vocal in certain spaces without having one person being the face of something. We're able to retreat a little bit, and then it becomes a little more about the artists of that evening instead of, you know, I keep getting up and I'm like, okay, everyone, so blah, blah, blah. You know, it's not just one person, one voice, one, I'd say, direction that things go. It spreads out a little bit more and can become perhaps a little bit more democratic, which means I'll stop talking.
I wanted to just, something that Bree just said wanted me to tell you all something which I didn't think we commented on, which was we remain anonymous inside of this group. We have had articles written about us, and anytime we advertise email or anything, we never name ourselves, and any images that we use of ourselves are always very blurred and concealed. So, I don't know, I felt like that was worth noting.
I have a quick thing to do. Okay.
For us, it's a bit different situation. We don't work always as a collective. It was the first time we worked together, and not the last one, because we're now collaborating for other things. And I think it was interesting for us as a combination of dance curators and visual art curators that has to, through a concept, which is the one of collectivity that we chose because we were interested exactly in this very charged politically concept, and how to nowadays could make sense to rethink this kind of notion. And so for us also the space was very important. It also came to us through a decision somehow. We were in dialogue both with a visual artist, Aldo Giannotti, who designed the space of the Tribune, which was very central to the whole concept, and with a choreographer, Chris Haring, Austrian-based choreographer, who also invited us the previous year to operate in his own studio. So that was for us a starting point, a rehearsal studio. So was how to take a visual art exhibition, because this was mainly the main body of the project, and to move it into a dance space. So it was really an operation of translating things that usually are in a certain kind of, in a specific white cube with specific rules and meanings, and moving it to a place where objects get a completely different meaning. And it is quite interesting to see a sculpture that in a rehearsal or a performing dance floor, it really changed completely the perception of it, and also liberate the audience from a certain kind of a distance that usually characterize the white cube. So this was for sure very important for us to move in this kind of dance space with an exhibition where we involve visual artists and performance and theoreticians and that's it. The way we worked as a collective with them, it was very much open as we did among us. It was important for us to set a number of keywords that we offered to the participants exactly in the same way, And then we received and accepted whatever was the reaction to those kind of keywords, because, as I said, the idea of collectivity was something we were also very scared about. We didn't want to work on an idea of a celebration of collectivity. We wanted to create a space for polemics about collectivity. And this really emerged in the moment we were able to accept those contributions as they came along. And so I think that this is exactly what happened. I mean, many contributions are also, contradictory among themselves, but this is what I think collectivity is about. So, yeah.
Je vous laisse la parole.
Okay. I can't think and lean. Hi, I'm Tommy DeFrance, and thank you very much for these presentations. I was thinking about something Chris Salter said this morning about resisting these kinds of boundaries between modes, and I wonder if these presentations are reminding us about how we seek an outside to the structures that have been standing and now seem to be in ruins, which is one of the things that I hear from both of these presentations. And I was thinking in the presentation before about didacticism, like the didactic of performance around food, that the performance will, tell you something you need to know about the food. But maybe there's something in this polemic that seems really important. I'm going to try to get to a question. There's something in the polemic that seems really important because it, again, is about maybe rebuilding or reimagining or imagining, maybe not even reimagining, but imagining. I wonder what would happen for your collective if you, and also just if we resist this language of scarcity, if we resist the language of capitalism that again is trying to reinscribe us back down here, so that then we're pulled back to the place of going, well, how are we like other curators? Or how are we like a white box? So my question is more like, isn't there an outside that you're already showing us? And what if we resist that language of scarcity and that language of, what's the other big word? Sorry. What is it? I just lost the word. Yeah, austerity, thank you. So, this language of austerity, because there's something that we know from the idea of performance and trying to be in energy alongside each other that makes something else possible. So my question is, how can you imagine outside of Rebecca Schneider and outside of, whoever the reference are, to get at the thing you're after in a way that feels like it could be maybe resistant to that moment of, there's this great moment where you arrive in the community of color, but I know that what you're really after is, where is this collaboration to make new work in these new spaces where we live now? So how do you want to get outside of that language that's keeping you sort of as queer white women, or keeping you in an identity politic that you feel uncomfortable with, to imagine something else that actually allows for relationship? Thank you.
In my research, kind of separate from this group, I'm working on a dissertation about the political economy of dance production in the 20th century, and I think it's less a narrative about, or that's like Randy Martin's argument, is like there's always been this, like within like cultural practice, it's always like this mode of where culture exceeds the boundaries that capitalism imposes on it. And I think I'm interested in something different than Randy. I did my master's with him. Which is, I come from a kind of Marxist feminist framework, and I think I'm more interested in looking at how capitalism's outside is already involved in it, and that's what Marxist feminists have always been arguing, that care work or social reproduction or the women's work is kind of the basis of the capitalist mode of production. And how this connects to art and our collective is that this kind of like DIY, like fuck it, we're just gonna do our own thing, is also a mode of self-exploitation, and feminists have been trying to deal with this problem of, do we valorize housework? Like, do we valorize DIY, do-it-ourselves, curatorial and artistic projects, or is that a mode of self-exploitation? So I think I'm interested in closing the exit doors, as opposed to the more BIFO autonomist narrative of like the revolution's already happened, we just have to recognize the comments that are already amongst us. I think I'm interested in a more like, okay, we're in this shit. and not to imagine that it's already that communism has already happened, but that it's something to be. It's a not yet. Was that too abstract? I don't know.
Ok, merci. On n'a malheureusement pas le temps pour d'autres questions. Je vous souhaite à tous un très bon appétit. On reste avec cette question en suspens. Okay, let's go for it.
Hi, my name is Lauren Sloan, and to not to sound terribly frank and to take us out of ideal and down into the concrete, but I'm very, very curious in terms of these alternate ways of creating work and showing work. Like, what are your, how are you living? Like, I'd love for each of you to speak to, like, okay, I work 17 jobs to be able to do this, you know, or I have 18 jobs and then I devote 3 hours every day, and each of us agrees to do 3 hours to the collective every day. Like, do you have individual, are you working on individual work outside of the collective? Like,
yeah. Cool.
Well, I think, yes, all of us work many jobs in myriad fields. Some of us are students. Some of us have worked together on independent artistic projects. And the show that we did, the piece that we did for this event was the first time we had all worked together collectively. I think one of the reasons I am drawn to collective work is the sense of ease and trust inside of this group that I never found working as a self-producing individual artist. It takes a lot of the load off to share.
Yeah, and I think one thing that has been really clear since we first started working together is that we each have the freedom to step out or step back as we need to, because we understand that our lives are always changing, and the level of commitment that we are able to really be responsible for is always changing. And so that's one really lovely thing about having 7 people, is that if one person needs to, step out for a little while because they are working on school or need to work more for money, that there are always others there to pick up that slack.
And I'll just also add that I feel like we have a pretty loose way of working with money, like for our collective, for projects. Some of it's grant funding, some of it's people that approach us and give us money for projects, some of it we self-fund. We have a pretty, again, it's not like this is how we fund work and this is how we fund our own work and this is how we fund Salta, you know what I mean? Like I feel like we're trying to stay really open and it somehow works out. Collectively, there's a lot more opportunities that come up.
I'm just really curious about the subtitle of your talk today, the total, pseudo, and anti-dance, and what you might have to say about that.
I think it has to do with our ambivalence about the category of dance. And like we often are like, ew, is it going to be too dancey? Or this kind of, like, we identify and are trained as dancers, but then hate a lot of dance. or this kind of like emergent like distinction between dance and choreography, like choreography as this control mechanism as dance that is the thing that moves away from it. So I think it's about the category of dance and our kind of ambivalence.
Yeah. And then sometimes when there's like the danciest dancey dance at one of our shows and we love it, we're like, ah, that was so amazing. And so I think there's also, there's the total dance. Like I think really actually trying to challenge ourselves not to define what we are categorizing per se, even though those are somewhat categorizing things, pseudo, anti, and total. But within that also identifying our own perhaps aesthetic desires or some of the work that we make, and then trying to stay a little bit outside of that as well as inclusive.
That's great.
Ok, bah, merci beaucoup.
And I just have to make
oui.
I'm sorry, I know it's so awkward. I'm like standing over here, but I don't know how to do everything. But I wanted to also thank you so much, because I know the conversation was a lot with Salsa, and that, thank you. Okay, it should be on this. And this, I have a housekeeping announcement. So just thank you very much again for everyone. And also, there's lunch now, but the big news is that half the people who reserved for tonight haven't checked in for the dinner at SAT. And it's kind of a big deal because we'll get stuck paying for it all, and we weren't counting on that. So if you can go see Leah right away to pay or not, it's a buffet. You need to be there at 6:30. It's a 5-minute walk. But please see Leah. We have to also talk to Leah. And, so it's lunchtime. And ICPP is doing a presentation in the other room. That's the Institute for Curatorial Practice and Performance, if you want to find out more about that. Lunchtime!